This is Beyond the Resume, the podcast that brings you the stories, advice, and insights behind some of the most successful people in real estate. Beyond the Resume is brought to you by Jackson Lucas Executive Search, the industry leader in human capital solutions. Here is Chris Papa.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us on today's conversation on faith-based development and community partnerships in affordable housing, a very relevant topic. We have attendees from across the real estate sectors, and we're excited for a thoughtful conversation here. And my name is Chris Papa. My work title is I'm a founding partner of Jackson Lucas. I'm here in New York City, but I also live in the Bay Area. And here is my co-host, Kristin Niver.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'm Kristin Niver. I'm a commercial real estate attorney at the law firm of Robinson Cole with a career-long focus on affordable housing and a affordable housing policy background. And I'm really excited to be here for this very timely topic on faith-based organizations. So I'd like to turn it over to the panelists just to give a brief self-introduction. I don't know, Russell, if you want to kick it off.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Russell Lang, President and CEO of Catholic Homes. Catholic Homes, New York, is established in 1967 and serves the entire footprint of the Archdiocese of New York, which is the 3 counties in New York City and the 7 counties north. We develop and preserve housing for families, seniors, and supportive populations with about 3,000 units total. And we are part of the overall Catholic Charities Network here in New York with our mission in the belief that housing is a sacred right. And pass it on.
Yeah, Jacqueline?
Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'm Jacqueline West Spencer. I'm the Senior Vice President of Real Estate here at Wesley Housing. We're a regional nonprofit developer in Virginia and in the District of Columbia. We have over 4,600 units of housing that we've developed in the area. We've been around since 1974. We actually come out of the faith-based and Methodist community and is part of our origin story. And I've been with the organization for a little less than a year. But my history and background has been in community development and affordable housing development. And I actually, started my career at a faith-based organization as a lowly intern. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation, and thank you.
I love that. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, great. Thanks for having me. I'm David Bowers. I wear 2 hats at Enterprise Community Partners. I'm the Vice President Market Leader for our Mid-Atlantic region and also the Senior Advisor for our National Faith-Based Development Initiative work. Enterprise is a national organization headquartered in Columbia, Maryland. We say our mission is to make home and community places of pride, power, and belonging. Our strategic priorities are around increasing housing supply, expanding racial equity, and supporting building resilience and strengthening economic upward mobility. We operate across 3 divisions: a capital division that's provided about $80 billion in financing historically, a solutions division that does policy work as well as programmatic work through regional offices, of which I lead one. And we also have an owner-operator division that owns and operates about 13,000 rental homes in the Mid-Atlantic region. And would like to say it's interesting because Enterprise was inspired out of a faith-based encounter that the late Jim Rouse, a very successful real estate developer, had with 3 women at the Church of the Savior community who 50 plus years ago wanted to preserve some buildings as affordable. And the story goes, Mr. Rouse did what any good developer would do, ran the numbers and said it didn't work. And I say never doubt the power of 3 women in a community of faith. So they went off and raised and put down a non-refundable deposit. And it kind of changed his life when he said, what if we couple for-profit business discipline with that faith and commitment to serve? So that is part of the founding DNA that runs through Enterprise. Kristin, back to you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and then I'll wrap it up with Pastor Norman Thomas.
Ronald Quarshie. Yes, like Ronald Quarshie with the First Baptist Church, Gresham Road. Through our community development, our Gresham Park Community Development, we partnered with the Sino Group, and we were able to build 125 units of senior affordable housing. We just got the certificate of occupancy the last part of December. We're in a process right now of taking applications for our units, and we did have some interface with enterprise community partners in Atlanta. That they were a very good help in terms of getting us on the road, and that basically tells us where we are.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So David touched a little bit on the history of faith-based ties to community development, but I wanted to open it up to see if Jacqueline could talk a little bit about the history and why faith-based organizations have been so central to affordable housing and community development, going back really to, I think, the late 19th century, and how that legacy still shapes a lot of the community development industry today.
Well, it's a great question, Kristin, and thank you for that. Faith-based organizations have been the backbone of the community support network for the communities that we serve. They have owned and operated the food pantries. They were first in a lot on our senior homes and senior housing developments that have been throughout all of our communities, have been done mostly by faith-based organizations. Our original transitions homeless shelters and being able to provide a safe haven for families and individuals in transition have always been part of what the faith-based community has provided. And so over the years, transitioning from food pantries to housing individuals within their sanctuaries, to providing the first senior housing developments within our inner communities and our rural communities as well, these organizations began to become more professionalized in creating community development corporations, really working with localities on acquiring vacant, dilapidated properties, really focusing on trying to leverage their resources of their congregation, their political resources, using their voices to navigate getting support from localities and states and so forth, to really invest and reinvest in communities that have been long forgotten. And then from transitioning from community development corporations, some of these faith-based organizations have partnered with CDFIs, LISC, and Enterprise to look at improving economic development opportunities within their respective communities, and have pushed through with development of supermarkets. I remember when the first Pathmark came into Harlem, was actually working with LISC through their retail initiative. That is part of the momentum that a lot of these faith-based organizations have created, and then have moved into home ownership, right? You have Nehemiah Homes that was operating in Brooklyn and really focusing on the way to stabilize communities to make sure that people stay within their communities and providing not only rental housing opportunities, but opportunities for that they can build assets and wealth within their communities. And it has grown from there. So it's like we can't ignore that the central foundation for the communities that we're in and serve have always been a part and stabilized by our faith-based organizations.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Given this history, I wanted to turn it over to David to talk about kind of what's changed and what's driving this institutionalization and professionalization of faith-based developers and affordable housing.
Yeah, thanks, Kristin. Appreciate it. I like to use the phrase radical common sense, right? Which is we have this convergence of opportunity and need. And what I mean by that is that we hear a lot about affordability challenges. We hear a lot about housing supply shortages. And so depending on the data point you look at, there is clearly a need for several million new homes in America, right? Multiple millions. Some say 2 to 3, some say 5 to 7, but millions of new housing units are needed in our country. So we have that. We know that 20% roughly of all renters in this country pay more than half of their income for housing. They're severely cost burdened. So imagine that more than half of every dollar they make is going just to pay for their rent. We know that on any given day, depending on the point in time count, you may have 600,000 to 700,000 people who are living without a home, period. They're homeless in our country. We've got 13 million people who are living in a healthy food desert, and half of people live in an affordable childcare desert. So there's all of this need. And what I tell people is that anywhere you go in the country, there's a house of worship. Red state, blue state, purple state, suburban, urban, rural. We have these mission-aligned entities who exist often in a sea of need, and they have a fundamental resource, real estate, that they're sitting on that is underutilized. An article by Forbes last year identified that there may be potentially 2.6 million acres of land owned by houses of worship in our country that could potentially support about 800,000 units, give or take. So there is that radical common sense of the convergence of need and opportunity. And so what I think we've seen on top of that, the estimate that was done by National Council of Churches a few years ago that said between 2015 and 2030, there were estimates that 100,000 congregations may close. So you have these mission-aligned entities sitting on a resource that's underutilized in the midst of a sea of need, and many of them are struggling with the notions of, financial challenges, relevance challenges, attendance challenges. And so I think that people have kind of finally woken up and said, oh, yeah, right, let's lean in on this and try to be more intentional on the work of engaging the faith community as solution partners.
Yeah. Well, there's about 200 people on this, attending this webinar. It's obviously a very relevant topic. People are interested in it, and, enterprises has a, it's becoming more of an institutional kind of an investment strategy. And then there's the faith side of it. The organizations are kind of stepping into the space into more creative ways. You're realizing, oh gosh, we have all this land. Maybe the best use is not what we're currently using. So let's partner with other organizations here. Now I want to talk to Russell here. Catholic Homes New York has a long history of mission-driven development. What motivates faith-based institutions to engage in affordable housing, and what makes your approach different?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So we operate in the Catholic space where we work, and our history is that kind of what the other panelists are saying. You have a parish that said, we can be doing more. They created an asset, and that's it. It kind of stays with the parish or the church. And after a while, those assets kind of came under an umbrella organization through this network of Catholic charities. And that's kind of how we see it also across the country with a lot of our Catholic charities, like organizations that do housing. So we have that kind of basis where we've had these assets for a long time. And then looking forward, we look at a lot of opportunities that could come from a parish. They could just be through the city or the state doing an RFP where we're doing, applying for the RFP because of our, history with working with affordable housing and being owners and developers. So, Catholic Homes is more of a developer, I would say, more than kind of what we're seeing now with the faith-based movement, which is kind of a parish or a mosque or a synagogue will partner with a developer, and they can do affordable housing, they can do market rate. It doesn't really matter. They're just trying to build housing, which is obviously a huge need in this country. But the distinction kind of with us is we're an affordable housing owner and developer, I would say, is kind of our distinction within kind of this marketplace of faith-based affordable housing.
Thanks, Russell. Ron, you're working directly with a congregation. You have deep ties to the neighborhood, and the congregation has deep ties to the neighborhood. What does trust building look like? How do you approach the congregation about this, to start exploring development? And how do you bring your community along in the vision? Can you take us through that process? You're muted, by the way. You're
Our partner, our Pastor Norman Thomas, has a great commitment to having the church actually do development outside the community. It's always good that, as some churches do, they kind of work on the inside and try to work with parishioners or congregants. But what our focus is actually to develop the community and be a service to the community. So when you're talking about food deserts, you're talking about lack of housing. That was one of the areas that we decided to take on. and to really actually say the congregants were all in on it, because that's they feel that's where their commitment is, and they share the vision of the pastor.
Thank you. Jacqueline, Wesley Housing has partnered with religious institutions across different markets. What do you see as the unique strengths and sometimes complexities of collaborating with faith-based partners?
Great question, Chris. In Wesley Housing, as you said, we've partnered with various faith-based organizations, and most recently merged with Virginia United Methodist Housing Development Corporation. And so our portfolio and reach has expanded beyond Northern Virginia to central and southern parts and rural parts of the state. So it creates a very interesting opportunity. I think the uniqueness and the strengths of partnering with a faith-based organization is partnering with an entity's commitment to mission and focus and the people that they are serving and the populations that they are serving, whether it's seniors, whether it's individuals with disabilities, it's folks that are transitioning and need permanent supportive services. Being able to partner with someone that has that strong commitment and clarity about the population that they want to serve is the unique strength that I think is really important, as well as the relationship management with the local community. I think that is the value and the power of working with a faith-based organization, is that they are the best relationship managers and advocators for their project and the mission and focus of the work that they're doing. The complexities that sometimes come out of that is we are partnering in a social mission, a mission-based mission with real estate development. It doesn't necessarily fit perfectly. So if we're serving certain populations or we have certain goals that our partner want to implement, but given the financial constraints of how affordable housing and real estate development is structured, sometimes forces us to talk to our partners about picking and choosing what is the most important, what is your priority in terms of who we're serving or how we're able to convey some of these services, and just leveraging the financial resources and being able to measure and the expectations and to provide clarity about what to expect throughout this process. I think, sometimes folks may think that real estate development is easy, but it usually takes 3 to 5 years of pre-development sometimes, and another 3 years of construction. And so that a decade can go by the time that when you first thought of a vision for a project to actually implement it, it takes time. And so being able to measure expectations, to understand and work with your partner on what are their priorities and what are they willing to compromise on and what are they willing to not compromise on, being able to iron out what those roles and responsibilities of a partnership up front is always the most important thing, and being able to really have those tough conversations up front. I think it's always good to be transparent with your partner, be transparent about what we're seeing in the marketplace as relates to financial resources lining up against what their needs are and what they find important. I'll just give an example. Really quickly, faith-based organizations, of course, want to maintain control of their site and their asset. Sometimes that control is going to look differently than what they thought. It may be a ground lease. It may be some type of other, long-term opportunity for them to maintain. But then financial institutions may have a challenge with that if they are still within the organizational structure. There are some, related entities that make it very difficult for a faith-based organization to remain in the ownership structure, or we just have to think about it differently. But having these conversations up front with our partners so that we can begin to demystify the process and set a realistic expectation, I think is very important. And that deals with those complexities of partnerships with faith-based organizations.
Thanks, Jack. David, you have a pretty unique perspective on all this, I think. What trends are you seeing in this world?
Yeah, Chris, thanks for that. And for the audience's sake, when Chris says having a unique perspective, so very quickly, being here at Enterprise for the last 20 years, we started our faith-based development initiative work 20 years ago and have been doing work around the country with various congregations and denominations on how do we, our goals around how do we expand, get more housing built and or community serving facilities, support equitable procurement, help strengthen the neighborhood anchor institutions. And we talk about building an enterprise program while nurturing a national movement that includes but is much larger than enterprise. And so currently we've got work going on in 9 states, 16 jurisdictions with over 150 congregations around the country through a cohort model that we've developed. So the answers that I'm going to give is grounded in that 20 years of experience and working around the country and the like. So Chris, directly to your question, a few key trends. One, we are seeing more government intervention in an intentional way to be supportive. And I always say, look, as was said at the beginning of this discussion, faith-based development is not new. It's been around for hundreds of years. What is new and emerging in some ways is the notion of, as you all have framed it, Chris, you and Kristin, the notion of it's being institutionalized, professionalized. We're going beyond just kind of individual one-off projects. So we're seeing now more governments, state governments, local governments. I laugh with people. There was a time when we had government folks who would come and talk to us about what we were doing, and they were like, but we can't say faith-based. We can't say congregations. We can't say house of worship, right? Now you've got bills being passed in places like California. The name of the bill is Yes in God's Backyard, right? And so there's this, again, the radical common sense where states and localities are recognizing we have a housing crisis. We have a housing affordability challenge. What can we do to solve for that? And so people have kind of said, you know what, wait, these mission aligned entities are there. What can we do? So one of that part, drilling deeper on that part of the trend. So what does that look like? Government, state and local support. It has led to things like density bonuses, zoning, speeding up, streamlining approval processes. In some cases, you've got state and local governments who are actually investing money in things like the cohorts that we talk about. So the capacity building and technical assistance that is so critical to help houses of worship become strong partners for developers like Russell's group or Jacqueline's group or others. So working, as Ron said, with churches like First Baptist of Gresham Road. So we've seen that. We've seen some local governments actually put properties in play, right, to kind of partner with properties that congregations have. So we're seeing a range of responses from state and local governments now that are looking to be intentional about being supportive in a more comprehensive way. That's one key trend. A second key trend is we are seeing more from the philanthropic side, where groups, banks, foundations, financial institutions, and others are investing money in various ways, certainly in the technical assistance and capacity building work that we talked about. Same thing, literally had conversation with a woman at a bank years ago who said, I love what you're doing, but I literally can't say the words faith-based in the bank. And, 5 or 6 years later, they were funding a faith-based development work. And so we are seeing, again, more folks in philanthropy, private philanthropy, who are investing in this. And I will say that one of the kind of emerging trends that is kind of a next frontier is what can private philanthropy do in terms of the capital side of the projects, right, to fill in some gaps there. 2 other quick things I'll mention in terms of trends. There's more analysis being done about how much land is owned by houses of worship and how much, what's the potential impact, how many units of housing or community facilities. So places like University of the Turner Center at UC Berkeley, right, or the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, where they can tell you this is how much land, this is how much may be able to get built on that land. So it's really part of a case-making effort that's being done. So people aren't just saying, well, there are a lot of houses of worship. When we quantify it and talk about the impact that could have, it helps to bring in more resources. And then the other thing I'll say, and then land the plane here, is that we're seeing more denominations and at a denominational level, more kind of interest in this. Enterprise has a collaboration with the Church of God in Christ, national, international denomination, who plans to train 200 of their congregations around the country. We know that at some place, and that's at a national level, right? Training 200 of their congregations to be able to do development. The Baltimore Washington Conference, the United Methodist Church has a whole effort going on. You can talk in the Catholic faith, Lutherans are looking at, multiple denominations have varying degrees of efforts going on to look at what more can they do in a more intentional way to go to a level of scale. And I think that is an encouraging trend to think about the notion of having the faith community as willing and intentional partners coupled with government and private sector and getting into this space is a trend. And preachers have 3 last words, so this will be one of mine. So I will just say this real quick. We are seeing more developers in the space, but I will also say there's more, there are definitely sharks in the water, right? Developers who see congregations as easy marks. So I want to be real clear about that. But we are also seeing a trend of more developers and technical assistance providers who are getting in with a sense of cultural competency. And by that, I mean, what does it mean to engage with a community of faith, whatever their background is, who are bringing competency and integrity to the mix, because word starts to get out about those who aren't moving with integrity or competence. And so people are saying like, yeah, we can't just see them as, oh, the congregation, go have a seat. They recognize they have to see them as equal partners. And so we're starting to see more of that emerging, I think, around the country.
Thanks, David. I'll turn it over to Chris.
David, I'd like to sort of stick with you and turn a little bit more to the practicalities and the nuts and bolts of how these partnerships come together. And I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about what faith-based groups kind of evaluate when a potential partnership comes their way.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things with a development partner. I mean, there's the good old-fashioned, does a development partner have a track record? What is their track record? What kind of experience do they have working in development, period? Have they done work with houses of worship before? Yes or no? Do they understand what that is like? What kind of economic strength do they bring? The balance sheet, right? How strong is the balance sheet? What types of developments do they do? Is their sweet spot rental? Is it ownership? Is it facilities? Is it under 50 units, over 200 units, whatever it may be? So some of that, who is their staff? How many staff? How many projects do they have going on? So in some respects, I always tell people, faith-based development in some respects is very unique, and in some respects is just like any other development. And so some of the basic things that you would do to kind of do an analysis of any partner are the same. That nuance around faith community, do they have, and again, this kind of cultural competency. We interviewed a developer once, very brilliant guy, who was a consultant at the time, and he said, you know what, this is a great business opportunity, but you know what, I'm going to pass. And he said, because I don't have the patience to sit through a bunch of meetings in a fellowship hall with deacons, trustees, and everybody else, right? And so he was very honest about that. And so, kind of understanding, does your partner, not just can they do the bricks and sticks, but can they navigate with a faith community and what that means? And I want to pick on something, go to something Jacqueline said earlier, which triggered for me the notion of the word relational. And so we're seeing more for my old pastor, Reverend Joaquin Willis, would say, you move at the speed of trust. And so for faith community, looking at development partners who are moving more in a relational way than a transactional way is really important, that we think when they start to get a sense of, is the potential partner we're looking at, can they get our vision? Can they be partners in vision as opposed to just thinking about things transactionally?
Yes, David. I'm hoping to turn it over to Jacqueline now to just kind of stay on this topic and, walk through what makes a partnership work well, and what makes it successful from both sides, and what all needs to come to the table to make it successful.
Sure. And I'm going to piggyback off of where David left in terms of the perspective of faith-based organization working with a development organization, the things to consider as a development organization, the things to consider and questions to ask and be mindful of is who are the points of contact? I know this sounds very basic, but in any type of partnership, understanding who are the points of contact within the faith-based organization, who makes decisions and how do they make decisions. Sometimes it is a room full of committee members, but at times when decisions need to be made quickly, to have a full committee, we need to know who we can communicate with and who the points of contact, and understand what your process is and what is the authorization under which you have the ability to operate. Having your ducks in a row as a faith-based organization to know that if you have a property or parcel What is your legal authorization in which you can operate? Having clarity about roles and responsibilities and ensuring that there's an alignment of those roles and responsibilities is very critical. Faith-based organizations typically are, and this is not a general, but what I've seen typically is that they are providing services and community outreach and programming, as well as the relationship management with the locality, with the neighborhood, with possibly with the political members within their area at the mayor level, at the city level, at the state level. But having clarity around roles and responsibilities is very important to establish up front. And then also establishing what those roles and responsibilities not only look like through a development process, so through pre-development and construction, but also long-term relationships. And then who has the authority to make decisions, and what is that decision-making authority when you don't agree? What does that look like? These are the issues that you really do need to iron out up front and bring to the table up front with an organization, because it is great that you're coming together and it seems all wonderful to do the development. But I always think about in one of my projects that I worked with in D.C. with Reverend Dr. Joseph Daniels, Emory United Methodist. He said, with any development partner, it's a 15-year marriage at least. Right? So the person, the organizations that you're engaging with, you have to think of as a marriage. The engagement period is all sexy and wonderful and nice, and everybody loves each other, right? And then you go through the formal marriage ceremony of a construction loan closing, maybe, or putting together your pre-development resources. But then you get into the real work of ensuring that this project is developed and that it's maintained. And working through some of the issues about guarantees and who's going to make a decision whether a funding source didn't come through. So do we need to cut a program or services? But how are you going to navigate those difficulties? Ironing those complexities of the partnership out up front is going to be very critical, and understanding roles and responsibilities. And then determining ownership up front, being clear with your faith-based partner. Is it going to be selling of the land, or is it going to be a ground lease? Will they be in the ownership entity? Establishing all of those upfront terms are going to be very important, and also aligning it with what the faith-based organization wants. So as a developer, we may come in that we want to control everything, but that's not how you deal with a faith-based organization. That is not the partnership. That is not the synergy that comes along. And so being mindful of that, that there's long-term ownership and assets that they want to maintain, and how do we complement that? How do we allow that to continue? And also navigating rights of first refusal. What happens at the end of the year 15? Who is going to own that asset, and being comfortable whether it is the faith-based organization or is it a development partner, if it's another nonprofit, and beginning to navigate those matters up front. The key is talk about it as soon as possible. So I'm like premarital counseling. Put everything on the table before you sign the MOU, right? Because it's important that you are aligned in what your outcomes are, and very clear about what you're going to be contributing to this relationship.
Kristin and Chris, if I may just pick up on something Jacqueline said about using that marriage metaphor. I will never forget being in an event where we were in a project, standing in a project with the developer and their church partner. The project was completed, and the church representative stood next to their development partner representative, talking to a group, and said, "We are here in this beautiful project. It is completed. And if we had to do a second project, we would not do anything with them. The only reason we are here is," and she said, "for the sake of the child," which is the building. And use that marriage metaphor. The only reason we're staying together is for the sake of the child, which was the building. This goes back to so Jacqueline's point is spot on about it. People have to look at it as relationship, long-term relationship. And I will never forget that moment. This was a large, very well-established development entity. And it goes back to what I was saying in terms of the trends, that you may get a project done, but if word gets out that you're not a good partner, not a good spouse in these relationships, right, you may not get that. Word goes out. And so I just wanted to co-sign that. We saw what Jacqueline said in real terms, and that language of the marriage was literally used by a church partner, even though the project had been completed and was done well. But they didn't feel like they were honored and respected in the process, and were like, we're not going to do anything with them anymore.
Thank you so much. I want to turn it over to Russell to kind of continue on this theme, but to focus a little more on the subsidy and financing arrangements and what you've seen kind of work best for mission-driven institutions, and maybe continuing on the theme of the long-term marriage, but what's worked and what doesn't. And
Yeah. So for us, I mean, when we're kind of working with our Catholic partners, and it's not just parishes, it's also, we're fortunate to have so many Catholic agencies in this area that we work with as well. There's over 90 of them that are over 100 years old and established in dealing with a variety of poverty-related issues, whether it's foster care, mental health, food pantry items. And the interesting thing is that a lot of them, when we're talking about this faith-based network, it's not just parishes, right? It's actually Catholic institutions that actually own assets as well. So we're brought in, Catholic Homes is brought in when, for example, you have like a foster care agency that's had a property for 80 years and they're trying to figure out how to reposition it as well. And that's something we look at as well, because they have an existing asset, and depending on the location, they're like, I want a new food pantry. How can I take this existing asset and sell it to you so you build it, and then do I return to this asset, or do I return, or I go take my money and go somewhere else? So that's kind of another thing within this faith-based conversation to think about. It's not just parishes or places of worship. It's these kind of organizations that have gone from kind of this helping people to doing something else, and they've kind of have their own nonprofit that's established. And as far as, just working with any institution in the faith-based network, I mean, you're still working a lot with the city and state, and that can be kind of a complicated conversation, because I think they have certain rules a lot of times where they want you to kind of choose between getting the acquisition and getting the developer fee. And that can be kind of a tough conversation, because even though, for example, we have Catholic in our names, and there could be the Catholic Food Bank of New York City, whatever, they view us as the same entity. So they're like, well, you can't get both. You can't get both the developer fee and the acquisition. So there's a lot of education that has to go into it as well. It depends on the guarantees as well. So that's kind of a little bit, once you kind of get the deal established, it's then bringing it to the agency and telling them that, we're a part of the same team, but we are different organizations. We have different boards. And that's kind of another kind of step that you have to take to make sure that, these parishes or faith-based institutions are getting maximized with their profit. Because, one thing that they like to say is, if there's no mission, if there's no money, right? It's great that these institutions are utilizing that. They may be asset rich, but we would kind of need to liquidate them so they can have cash to do more of their mission. So, as us, as a faith-based developer, we're really trying to maximize the profit to that organization that's bringing us their assets, so, they could do more of their great work, because we're focused on the housing, but they're focused on the foster care, for example. So, like, the more that I can do to maximize their kind of endowment, the better the deal is.
Kind of a good transition. Jacqueline, working with faith-based organizations, and a lot of, affordable housing is not just like set it and forget it, let's develop this and like move on to the next project. There's a lot of services involved. How do you ensure like the proper services, the residents, the congregation has a proper, access to those services?
Sure. Great question. Sure. Great question. I think, one of the things that, first starting with is ensuring that we're matching the funding sources with the ability to implement those services. So we have to make sure that within our development that we are initially building in what the mission and vision is around services for that respective project, and ensuring that we're lining up the proper funding sources to implement those. Also, what's critical is doing a needs assessment. So I think that's always a good basis when an organization thinks that they want to do senior housing or programming for special needs community, or a food programming, or improving people's economic status. And so wealth development, health and wellness type programs is really doing an assessment of the community. At Wesley Housing, we have a robust resident services department. And so doing those initial outreach and community scans and neighborhood scans of what the resources are and understanding what the needs are, doing community assessments, if it's an existing property or existing community members, being able to go out and work with them and really identify if the needs are what we think they are or what our partner envisions. And then once we've determined that this in fact is the direction that we're going in, doing a scan of what are the resources that are available at the state and local levels. Are there any other funders, private funders that we're connected to that we can leverage and bring to the table? Are there intermediary partners like Enterprise, LISC, and community impact partners and others who have additional resources that can help complement and encourage these projects? But I think, a lot of one thing to acknowledge is our faith-based institutions already have these existing relationships. They have these relationships with funding partners. It may be internally within their respective organization that there may be the United Methodist Development Fund, right? There may be other funding sources within their diocese and so forth that can help to leverage additional resources. And so that is where it takes all of us to put our heads together. And maybe we have to bring in some external consultants that can help in assessing what the community needs are sometimes, bringing in, if we can't do it among ourselves, making sure that we have access to the right consultants, and then matching up what the needs are with the respective financial resources.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And Ron, I'm going to talk to you. Something I don't often think about. You're running a church, you congregation, and then all of a sudden now you're going to be in the development business, the home, you're going to be owning apartment communities, property management. How do you kind of marry up your faith-based mission aligned with actually being like a property owner and manager and developer?
Well, I think part of the situation is maybe getting a good start, getting a good education on what the process is all about. I had an opportunity to take the Enterprise course. I think it was about a two-year course that took you from the beginning of the process of making the decision of building affordable housing units to the point where you actually get to that point. The course was great. So that when I did get to a point where a developer, I had a chance to interview developers who were interested in acquiring our property for that particular purpose, it made it a lot easier. I knew what the questions to ask. And so it was, from that viewpoint, it was kind of easy. We were blessed to have an opportunity to partner with Vecino. And from that viewpoint, with their skill and expertise in that particular area, they kind of guided us in that process. But with regards to your question, I don't think if you take the aspect of servicing the community, then that's our chief and top goal. So the actual being a property developer, there's not that much of a conflict. Our main purpose is to service the community and then listen to what they do want. In our particular area, we had a 10,000 waiting list for senior housing. So for our church, it was easy that this is where we need to be and what we need to do. So,
thanks, Ron. Russell, I know Catholic Homes takes a multi-generational perspective on stewardship. What does long-term success look like for you?
Yeah. We've had some assets since, like I said, 1967, and we're in our fourth, major rehab. So that's awesome, to have that relationship with the community for so long and to have second and third generation people living in those assets, I mean, that's true success for sure. And we try to take that lens to new developments. But those new developments are kind of different because the programs that they used in 1967 are very different from the programs that they use today. And, for example, in New York City, there's a homeless component in everything that we do. There's a homeless set aside in every housing, which is great because that matches a lot with a lot of our organizations. So again, we're kind of more in charge of the housing, but we're able to pair that with a Catholic service provider that deals with a specific population. So that's even more success too, to kind of have these social service organizations that deal with a variety of poverty issues in kind of the budget for the operations, so that they have a different source of funding that they didn't have before. So they're looking at different agencies, and now they're in the housing agencies, and that's a great way to diversify them. So I think that's kind of one thing that we try to look at too, with given our network. How can we use housing resources to diversify these kind of Catholic agencies so they have a different source of funding that they didn't have before, while also helping us serve our mission instead of going out to the general New York City market that may specialize in the formerly homeless. We have these people that are much closer to us, and we're very transparent with what we're trying to get into this deal. So I think that's kind of a measure of success too, when we can kind of bring in someone that is kind of within our network.
Nice. And we got to remember, this is all about, end of the day, it's about the residents getting people into housing. I guess, David, since you have such a broad perspective, like what are effective ways for developers and community partners to strengthen their relationships with the tenants, the residents over time?
Yeah, thanks for that. It really does go back, I think, to that notion of relational focus. And Ron talked about, serving the people. So, and I'm kind of connecting all these dots, what Jacqueline talked about earlier in terms of, like, again, the premarital counseling, the marriage metaphor. It's just good old fashioned relationship 101, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Show people respect, listen to people, communicate often. Don't just communicate when you have an ask of them. Hear where people are, try to feel the pain points. I think Russell said also, like, being very transparent, right? About what role you play, what your self-interest is, what their interest may be, and respecting and finding places where there are mutual goals. And I think that applies whether we're talking about the congregation and its potential development partner, or the congregation and its development partner with the residents that it's working with the community that it's working with, before the project's done, while the project's going on, and after the project has been open. And I do think for some congregations, that I think it's been talked about, that notion of what role, am I the faith provider who's there to help you, or am I the landlord, right, so to speak? And that's a different dynamic. And yet it doesn't have to be a bad one, right? Landlord doesn't have to be bad, and service provider doesn't always have to be good, right? It isn't always going to be good, right? And so it's this notion of, if we're I always ask people, like, what business are you in, right? And I said, if you're in the people business, that's different than if you say, I'm a builder, I'm a developer. Yeah, that's what you do, but what business are you in? What service are you here to render? And so for a faith community and their development partner engaging, I think, with their residents in that way, and with community throughout, will help make for healthier relationships.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, do you want to turn it over to a few of the questions, Chris? We have a few.
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
Okay. So the first is from Jim Ditrunner from Webster Bank. So thank you, Jim, for joining. And he asked kind of, what is the biggest barrier to entry that you see with these faith-based groups, and how can the public sector, government agencies, lenders, and developers help smooth some of these partnership opportunities? So I would open that up to any of the panelists to share.
I'll take a first stab at it. I'll tell people I'm a proud graduate of Howard University School of Divinity. I took Old Testament, New Testament. I took systematic theology, Greek. I didn't take Greek. Greek took me. I literally took a course on how you counsel people who are dying. What I didn't get in seminary was a course on how to negotiate a land disposition agreement or how to run a real estate pro forma. So one of the biggest barriers are that the people who are oftentimes in leadership positions, who are stewards of massive of land and land assets, are not equipped. And that's not a criticism, it's just an observation, are typically not educationally or professionally equipped to manage that land and that asset, and or to engage with professionals in the industry who are about this. So one of the biggest barriers is that we found houses of worship either are too scared and won't move at all, right? And so, right, or they'll move too quick because, hey, I'm the big pastor, I'm the preacher, everybody looks up at me, and I don't want to admit to folks, I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to this, in this space. And so either arrogance or fear will lead to either no decisions or hasty decisions, and you'll have bad outcomes either way. So barrier to entry, I think, is really that need to build the capacity of folks on the faith side to understand the need that's in community, to understand that, yes, this is absolutely difficult, but eminently doable, and equip them with the information they need. I appreciate what Brother Ron said, to help them then become comfortably conversant at the table with the players in the ecosystem. And the other thing is just the money. Jacqueline talked about it earlier, the years. So we need people who get the long-term commitment. It takes time for the TA and capacity building. But then again, at a certain point, these are projects like any other project. And so they're going to need the financing, the capital, the subsidy dollars that any project would.
Oh, great. I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything to chime in there on Jim's question.
I just think in general, just to manage expectations, most deals are hard. There's never like an easy deal, so if there's, there could be, you could have a great site, but it has terrible infrastructure, and the infrastructure costs are, you're going to have to spend about 15 to 30 grand to get to the answer that the deal is not feasible unless you're finding like a non-housing source. So that's number one. And then number two is, I think a lot of people think just because it's real estate and they see a lot of wealth with real estate, that it's kind of automatic that, a redevelopment or a new construction is going to be a solution for everything. Everyone's going to make money. It's a long-term asset, and the asset's going to make money over time again and again. But I mean, the same headwinds that face the affordable housing industry are the same that deal with these faith-based assets. And these are long-term assets, and sometimes there's good years and sometimes there's bad years, and they're very hard. But it kind of emphasizes what the rest of the panel is saying. The relationship needs to be really strong to kind of weather that storm over a very long period of time.
Thank you so much. So another question that we received that sort of ties to David's comment is if some of these same principles apply to HBCUs. And as a Howard grad, David, I don't know if you have anything to share there, or
Yeah, I think in general,
maybe what are the differences for HBCUs that own land? Or
yeah, I think, some of these laws that I'll actually broaden it. I think colleges, universities in general, like who are large mission aligned landowners, right? And I think some of the legislation that's been passed around the country has sometimes included colleges, universities of certain types, sometimes folks have looked at hospitals, nonprofit owned hospitals, maybe having lots of land. And so I do think that what's similar is that folks may not be in the real estate development business per se, right? In some cases they are. They build buildings, classrooms, dormitories, and the like. And so there's, that can be a difference of sort, but there's a similarity of like, this may not be your core mission with this. And so there is this need around kind of building the capacity. But going to what Jacqueline said earlier, there is a difference around a couple of things. One, the decision-making process in a faith community versus a college or university, right, could be different. And then many colleges, universities have been around a long time. So have houses of worship. And I think there is this issue around legacy right? And continuity, where if I always tell people, folks in the development community, their frame of reference is quarterly. In the faith community, it's eternity. So the sense of urgency and what is pressing may be very different. And I think for a university, there is some similarity there in terms of, like, we've been around a long time. We anticipate we'll be around a long time. So a lot of some of the very similar principles. But one, and I'll end here. One key difference is in the faith community, when you talk about faith, right, a divine, a sense of calling, that is a important difference and nuance that is different from any other entity out there that may be thinking about this.
Thank you so much. We actually have tons of questions now, so we won't get to all of them. But the last one that I thought we could touch on was, and maybe Ron could speak to this or others, but how church leadership can build capacity before taking on a project. And once they're ready to move forward, how they find resources to support their staff during pre-development. And that may be where, CFIs come in or TA support or whatnot. But I think that's an interesting question if anyone wants to wrap up on that one.
Well, from my viewpoint, nothing beats knowledge in terms of knowing what it is you're about to get into. I think your church has to have a certain amount of resources that is willing to put towards some pre-development expenses, that type of thing. But understanding what they are, is important. So I would just say, just do your research as far as what is actually involved. There are sources out there that will be able to get you where you need to be if you are, want to get into this type of situation. So just as a church, just be diligent and just do your research.
Yes, there was actually another separate question from an anonymous attendee. Is there any type of document worksheet available to churches trying to begin the process, or is there anything available to help them, ask questions? Or, maybe David could speak.
David should have
He's got Ron took that course before even any of this happened, right? Ron, you were prepared.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I will say, Kristin, that online Enterprise's website, enterprisecommunity.org, you just type in faith-based development guide. It's essentially an online resource library that has a range of things from case studies to project documents, information, JV partnership templates. There's a whole range of resources. So at www.enterprisecommunity.org, and just put in the search box faith-based development guide, and it's a resource library there that can be helpful.
Yeah, and I will say one interesting thing is surprisingly how interfaith this all is. We work with many different other religions, from Mormons, Jewish, Muslim, accordingly, in many different partnerships across the board. And I will say, for any folks that have a faith-based piece of land or faith-based and mission or kind of association, there's Enterprise has a tremendous amount of resources, but, you'd be surprised even if you reached out to kind of a Catholic charities organization and somehow that question gets to me. If you're from Missouri, that question on some kind of development question may come up and percolate through a larger organization and somehow reach my desk. So I think, what Dave was saying before, there's a lot of consultants out there, that I don't know their intention, but sometimes their focus is a little bit more on closing the deal. I think there's a lot of resources out there to kind of tell you, how, you should maybe look at your deal accordingly, and just note that just because you're one denomination doesn't mean that with this faith-based initiative, there aren't a lot more resources out there. I think the overall Catholic network has over 50,000 units of housing. So, if you come up to any of those local organizations, say, hey, I need help with kind of my land, everyone's willing to help. So I think that's just kind of an important thing to note of how kind of interconnected this all is as well.
Thanks, Rick.
And And I'll just add, and to piggyback off what Russell was saying, talking to other faith-based organizations that have done this work. I think most organizations want to share their experience. They want to share their lessons learned, because for those who've done it, it has been a labor of love, but there's a lot of folks are willing to communicate their experience and share what they've been through. And so outreaching to your fellow organizations in your community that you've seen who have done this work, your organizing structure of your organization, actually a lot nationally, United Methodist Development Fund and folks, they have experience and expertise that they can share with you. So sometimes just starting with your home base and connecting with other churches within your area or your organizing entity, they have resources and have the ability to help you begin to start this process.
I just want to thank all the panelists and Kristin for coming on here. And this is a great topic. It's super relevant. I know Kristin and I have been preparing for this one for a while now. So really want to thank you all for coming on here.
Yeah, I mean, 200 participants and we barely touched the surface. So I think this was a huge success, and I hope we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, maybe we'll check in next year and see how it's developed.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Resume, a Jackson Lucas podcast where we take a deep dive into the career journeys of some of the top minds in real estate and equip you with the knowledge to move forward in your path towards the success you've envisioned. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond the Resume. We're grateful for your support. All episodes of Beyond the Resume are brought to you by Jackson Lucas, building inclusive and diverse businesses through talent acquisition. Visit us at jacksonlucas.com.